everyone! My name's Julia and I'm an educator at the Columbia River Maritime Museum. The Columbia River Bar, where the Columbia River meets with the Pacific Ocean, is considered one of the most dangerous waterways in the world. And since 1800, the Graveyard of the Pacific has claimed over 2,000 ships. Each month leading up to the opening of the museum's Shipwrecks exhibit, the Education Department will feature one famous shipwreck that fell victim to the Graveyard of the Pacific. This month, we're talking about the SS Laurel. SS Laurel was a steamship from the Quaker Line, built in 1920 by Ames Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Seattle. The Laurel was originally christened the West Jessup, but she was later acquired by the States Steamship Company in Portland, and her name was changed after that. When the Laurel left port, the ship was headed towards the east coast through the Panama Canal. A crew of 32 signed on June 13, 1929. The crew struggled with the ship's cargo from the start, and that could have been an omen for her future problems. As the crew began loading lumber onto the ship, she began to list about 30 degrees to port. She was still listing as the ship headed down the Willamette River, but was brought to an even keel when the crew stopped to take on fuel at Linton. The deck load was reportedly measured at about 18 feet high. On June 16th, the Laurel attempted to cross the Columbia River Bar with 7 million board feet of lumber. The weather was originally fine, and the Laurel passed through Astoria around midnight, just as the Columbia River was starting to whip up and storm warnings were issued by the U.S. Weather Bureau. Just after arriving at the bar, the steering engines on the Laurel failed. Soon enough, the force of the wind on the ship's deck load and the river's heavy current blew the Laurel off course, and the ship was pushed into Peacock Spit. It grounded at around 2 a.m. and was hit over and over again by heavy waves. As the sea began to swell, it swept 2 men through a gaping hole in the ship. The second cook landed on the deck and suffered severe back injuries, but was able to make it back to the bridge, while a 19-year-old boy named Russell Smith was never seen again. The ship began to fall apart as it pitched in the sand. The waves broke the deckload chains, causing piles of lumber to fall off the freighter and into the water around it. Eventually, the ship began to split along the forward well deck, causing the first third of the ship to separate from the rest of it. A rescue boat attempted to help them in the middle of the storm, but couldn't get close enough because of all of the lumber rolling around in the waves. The crew began to pack themselves in the radio shack to take shelter. The sea continued to wreak havoc on the Laurel as the ship drifted closer and closer inshore until it was almost half a mile away from the piece that had broken away. 2 airplanes flew over the shipwreck. One tried to help the crew by trailing a line to them without success, while the other only came to take pictures of the wreck while it was happening, which the sailors cursed them for. As the hours dragged on, 2 other motor lifeboats came to the rescue, one from Cape Disappointment and the other from Point Adams. The boats couldn't get as close as they needed to with all of the lumber floating in the waves, so a Coast Guardsman told the crew they would need to lower lines from the freighter and put themselves into the water to be rescued. 18 men were taken onto the Cape Disappointment boat, and 6 were rescued on the Point Adams boat. Then, at almost exactly the same moment, the motor lifeboat's engines both failed. Many think this is because water got into their air intakes after how rough the waves had been. Now both boats were in danger of crashing into each other. Somehow, the Point Adams boat managed to drift its way to shore, where everyone jumped out of the lifeboat and splashed their way through the shallow waters to the north jetty. The Cape Disappointment crew got out oars and began rowing away from the Laurel. After some time out in the open ocean, the lifeboat's engines started up again. The Coast Guard cutter Red Wing joined the disaster and came up alongside the Cape Disappointment boat to take on survivors from the Laurel. When they got on board, they took off the life belts and shirts they were wearing and began to try to scrub off the oil they were covered in that had leaked from the ship. Because of the dangerous conditions that night, 7 men had to be left on board the Laurel, including the ship's captain, Louis Johnson. The next day, a 3rd motor lifeboat came from Willapa Bay to retrieve the rest of the crew, but Captain Johnson refused to leave. For 2 days and 2 nights, the captain stood vigil over the Laurel, apparently believing there was still hope for the freighter. 54 hours later, the captain finally set up a white flag on the deck to let everyone know that he was ready to be rescued. Berenson reported that it was believed Johnson stayed behind to protect his owner's interests, and sure enough, during a press conference in Astoria, Johnson stated that his reason for staying with the ship was that he wanted to protect his cargo from looters. He wanted to try to save the lumber by waiting for the Laurel to come on shore. There were newspapers that praised Captain Johnson for his fearlessness, but Coast Guardsmen were reportedly furious that he had put them in such a tough position. If he had gone with the rescue crews right away, he would have made the situation less risky. but instead the Coast Guard had to wait until the captain was ready and needlessly put themselves in harm's way to rescue him. A few weeks after the wreck occurred, the U.S. Steamboat Inspection Service investigated Johnson, and they suspended his license for 90 days due to the negligence he exhibited during the incident. The SS Laurel was left to its own demise in the sands of Peacock Spit. The Columbia River Maritime Museum has collected several artifacts from the Laurel shipwreck over the years, including a clock and a boxed compass taken from the wreck. One particularly interesting artifact is a salvaged mirror donated by a member of the Cape Disappointment Coast Guard crew that responded to the accident. A few weeks after the shipwreck occurred, Cape D's station commander gave the crew permission to go on board and save what they could. This mirror is a keepsake from a disaster that took place over 90 years ago. Next month, the Columbia River Maritime Museum Shipwreck series will feature the Václav Vorovsky. Thanks for watching!